Hello, my name is Alex, and this is Rookie Detective. Warning, this episode will spoil story elements from quite a few video games. This will include What Remains of Edith Finch, Gone Home, Firewatch, and Dear Esther. They are all spectacular games that I recommend enjoying yourself before continuing. Otherwise, enjoy the episode. So I want to start things out with a story. It's not about What Remains of Edith Finch, but rather about a game that surely influenced it, Gone Home. While I played the widely acclaimed effort from the Fulbright company around its initial release in 2013 and had been enthralled by it, I hadn't revisited it since. It's a game that doesn't invite numerous playthroughs because its biggest strength, or at least what people take away from it most, is the third act revelation that it's just a game about exploration, and what you're exploring starts to get really intense. You rummage through your family estate, inspecting items, hoping to find out more information about your character's missing younger sister. It's a sweet story about love and family that's very memorable. So last year, when it was finally re-released on the PlayStation 4, I bought it with the intent of playing it with my girlfriend to get her take on it. It seemed like something that would be right up her alley, and she had no knowledge of anything to do with the game prior. So getting to watch somebody go through that surprise I felt when I first played had the potential of being something really special. Unfortunately, that revelation never happened. Instead, we stopped playing less than an hour in because the game was starting to scare her. This was something that completely baffled me. This is a game about discovery and relationships. Of course, I didn't tell her that because I wanted her to go in blind and experience it just as I did, but I still didn't understand what about it was scary. After some thought though, and realization about the game's roots, it started to make more sense. You're roaming through a massive house, alone, on a dark, rainy night. All that's missing from that scenario is John Carpenter's Halloween theme song. And then after even more thought, I began to remember that I certainly had these same initial feelings about the game during my first playthrough. I can't sit here and pretend like the lightning and eerie atmosphere wasn't kind of frightful. Horror undertones propel almost every great walking simulator. Now, before I continue, I should probably explain what exactly a walking simulator is to anyone unfamiliar with the title. A walking simulator, which is sometimes shortened to walking sim and occasionally referred to as an exploration adventure game whenever people think calling it a walking sim is derogatory for whatever reason, is a narrative-focused video game where the story is experienced and revealed through exploration and discovery. The character you play as roams through an open environment, whether that's a mansion like Gone Home or a forest like Firewatch, another popular walking sim. And in these games, rather than learning details through dialogue or cutscenes, you discover information through reading journals or books, or coming across an area that triggers narration. What makes each of these games unique is what each decides to dedicate their story to being about. Gone Home is about a sister's journey to discovering what happened to her family and why her sister left. Campo Santo's Firewatch is about a man's departure from the struggles of a difficult marriage through taking on a job watching forest fires. And then there's also Dear Esther from the Chinese Room, a truly minimalist walking sim where you just walk about an island while your character narrates a series of letters written to his deceased wife. While the unique stories are a big part of what makes them such critical successes, I wanted to focus on an aspect that isn't paid as much attention. That aspect is the game's fearful elements that make them something people cautiously want to keep exploring. It's a little more obvious in the game Firewatch, because in that one you literally see a silhouette of a mysterious figure early on, and at one point return to your watchtower broken into and disheveled. So the idea of being fearful in that game makes a little more sense, and it comes a little easier. But still, with that game, along with the aforementioned 2, there's a strong horror component crafted by being alone in a mysterious place. And it's that fear of the unknown that keeps the player motivated to finding out the endgame of every story with Scooby-Doo-like glee. What's out there? Who's out there? When does the other shoe drop? At the conclusion of each game, we get resolution of that mystery, as well as an empathetic story that stays with us. Usually, there was nothing to fear at all. In Gone Home, you're alone the whole time and are left reflecting at the end on your sister's lesbian love story and your parents' flailing lives together. In Firewatch, yes, there's the mysterious figure that you come into contact with, But there are also so many other mysteries throughout the forest, as well as your internal one about your feelings with your work wife Delilah, that you're driven further by solving the mysteries rather than fearing them, save for the end when the suspense really climaxes, though then you're really more excited and anxious than anything. And in Dear Esther, outside of a distant figure that disappears whenever you approach it, the enticement of piecing together the story and constructing a conclusion outweighs the frightening loneliness. Now originally, I was probably going to end it there. I didn't have much on top of that to add to the topic of walking sims. There are a few other great ones that don't rely too much on horror, like The Stanley Parable, Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, and The Unfinished Swan. But overall, I thought I had the general idea of it all. That is, until I played the recently released What Remains of Edith Finch. Now, this is an even more serious spoiler alert. What Remains of Edith Finch is a sprawling game, and I'm going to be talking about many important parts of it, and I absolutely loved my experience with it, and really do recommend playing it before continuing. Developed by Giant Sparrow, who also produced The Unfinished Swan, the game follows a girl named Edith Finch as she explores the deaths of the Finch family through a series of vignettes brought upon by objects she discovers throughout her childhood home. She's returning for the first time in years after she and her mother left to escape a perceived family curse that took every Finch relative away from them. While living there previously, a majority of the rooms in the house were locked and she was unable to explore them. But after her mother passes and she inherits the house and a key that unlocks those rooms, she returns to explore and see what was being hidden from her all that time. Each room ends up belonging to a deceased family member, whether that be a great-grandfather or an uncle or a brother, and in each of their rooms is something that transports her into the final moments of their lives. Now, after the first couple of vignettes, you sort of realize the game's purpose, and because of it, that horror element that elevated the great walking sims before it vanishes. I know the end game, I know the finale is me finding out how everyone dies, and for that reason there's nothing really to fear, except maybe there is. The vignettes do something brilliant. While you know each of them end in death, you never go into the situations knowing exactly how. Well, I guess there's one that's pretty obvious, but the rest are so profound that they catch you completely off guard. Few of them are solitary, the majority of them contain some fantastical element that really heighten their unpredictability, and they all play out in a very creative fashion. There's the death of her great-aunt Barbara, who was a child horror film star. It's told in the style of a retro pulp comic book, which ends with a collection of horrific monsters devouring her. There's another story of her brother Lewis, whose mind is taken over by a mental illness that creates an internal video game, while he works at a cannery cutting the heads off of fish before sending them on a conveyor belt to be distributed. He carries on doing this simple job like a model worker while slowly losing himself to the mythical fantasy that takes over his brain. In the end, he bows to receive a crown for a kingdom he's taken reign of in the video game, only to be decapitated by the blade he used to behead the fish before succumbing to his delusions. There are a handful of other disturbing, imaginative tales in this game, my favorite of which I didn't even mention. It's a game that shocks and awes and does something really special. I initially thought it was missing a key component to greatness, but it ended up revolutionizing the medium. While you're aware of the game's conclusion, though I will say the finale does still contain a few surprises, What Remains of Edith Finch retains that unknown presence that makes discovery in any walking sim such a thrill to experience. And the game's ability to turn the genre's model on its head shows how exploration adventure games can and will continue to display supremacy for many years to come.